Hello, hello. Here we are again, coming to you from Broadcast Team Alpha with the Paranormal World Show. You know, the show for the thinking global citizen. My name is Agi, and I'm the host tonight. And we are transmitting on 44 different platforms around the world, and one of them is the Conscious Awakening Network. You got to go over there and have a look at them, people, because they got close to 50 different shows over there that cover all of the stuff that both you and me need to know about. You'll find them at consciousawakeningnetwork.org, and that's where you want to go. And before I introduce the guest, I also want to tell you how you can connect with me and also my co host, Nori. And you can go to broadcastteamalpha.com and go into the contact feature and send us an email, and we will get back to you and see what we can do. And if you are watching us on YouTube right now, that's the place to be, because that's the only place where we can watch the chat room. If you ask questions about something in the chat room, you just type it in capital letters. That will let us know that it's a question, so we don't lose you in there. And I also I want to tell you that Nori and I put together a mastermind group that we do incredible things. It seems like we create out of seemingly nothing sometimes. It just shows up what we ask for. When you know how to communicate with the universal mind or the quantum field where everything past, present, and future is, you can latch on to something and bring it back home. Come and join us and check it out. If you send me an email to themastermindconnection@gmail.com, I'll send you a link and some information, and then you can come and check it out and see if you want to be some part of something that is bigger than yourself. And now I wanna introduce a little bit of the guest here because there's so much that he have done. I'm going to have him supplement the introduction a little bit after I'm done because I cannot do it justice. We have John Bro Wilkie. He's a movie star and he's with us today for a whole hour. And he's been on Star Trek and Voyager and Next Generation and many other Star Trek franchise movies. And he, God, he also have been taking pictures of UFOs, or now, yeah, no, that's just UFOs. I refuse to use the other one. It's UFOs to me. So, and there's a method that he's going to talk about that'll show you how you can do the same thing. And you will see them every time, just about every time you try. This is something that's going to be interesting for a few of you. I want to talk with John Bro about some of the things that he's been involved with on the Star Trek, but also there is a book. It's called F.A.S.T, F-A-S-T. We want to talk about that because in there we have pictures of things in space, in orbit. In fact, maybe also the military space station, which is bigger than the one we know about and totally covered up. They're never mentioned anywhere, but there is one. And this book, the FAST, F-A-S-T, that stands for Far Above Space and Time. And also there's a website there, farabovespaceandtime.com. And that is by John Welch, and he's going to talk about that. because this is something that people need to know about. And gosh, welcome to the show, John Bro.
Mr. Augie, I appreciate meeting you so much and being given the opportunity to speak with your audience.
We had a good talk before the show here for almost an hour, and I could talk for another 8 hours, and he probably wouldn't run out. So now, how did this start with you having experiences all the way back to, I think, 1966, when you made a video that is still on YouTube? And you can talk a little bit about, but this is a way where you can take pictures of UFOs, and everybody can do it.
Well, I'm trying to figure out where to interject. I'm probably 1996, or I don't. In 1966, I was watching the original Star Trek on
Yeah.
television when it was first broadcast. I was about 5 years old, though.
Yeah, this is where my hand did something on its own. I wrote it,
No,
the
that's
numbers.
fine.
Okay.
So,
Gotcha.
if I could give you a little background, I'm originally from Detroit. I was supposed to be a third generation automobile engineer, but I didn't have that interest. When I when I had graduated from high school, my first job was to enlist in the United States Air Force. And after taking some special testing, I was given the opportunity to work on their frontline, aircraft, the fighter jets, specifically the F-15 and the Pratt & Whitney F-100 engines. I mean, most kids get out of high school, they go work at the local grocery store. I was thrown immediately into high-tech stuff, and I loved my job. The organization was a little rough on me, but and during my tenure in there, a little side note that's interesting, that at the time nobody was familiar with this, but I had gone on what they call a TDY, a temporary duty assignment, and I was sent out to Nellis Air Force Base outside of Las Vegas, and
That's Area
bussed into
51, huh?
well, outside of there, yeah, and I can give people a little more insight on the reality versus the hype, okay? So there's one day I had two people running a flight line of 12 birds, and my supervisor came up to me and said he wanted me and one of my coworkers to take a little trip. They wanted us because supposedly they were undermanned, and they wanted us to take a look at a motor that was at another adjacent base. Okay. It didn't really make a lot of sense to us because we had an awful lot of work, to keep this schedule. We had a minimum personnel, but they drove us out. I want to say about 45 minutes outside of Las Vegas, and to a little place. First of all, it's called Rachel, Nevada.
Mm-hmm.
Took a little left turn on a street. It was out in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing out there. It didn't make any sense to me. I'm repeating myself. I tend to do that. I apologize. And there's a little mailbox, a little black mailbox, kind of like a marker where to turn. And then we went a little farther down another road, came up to this large back gate. It's the one that everybody knows now with the sign, no pictures, deadly use of deadly force authorized. But I had a top secret clearance with a need to know. In other words, it was compartmentalized to my specific, what they call the MOS, my specific job.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a large gate, and it opened up, and very unassuming. But we had several armed security agents come, and they had their guns on them. And I've got my badge. I'm not understanding why they have to, interrogate me on this level, and checked our backgrounds. And then we passed and they let us through. So if you're allowed entry into that facility, and you know, you always see it on TV with the hill, and they got the guys up on the in the little trucks watching you, right? If you are allowed into that facility, it's approximately another 45-minute drive down to it's adjacent to the dry lake bed. I think back in the day it was where they used to test their nukes and, you know, drop their bomb range. My apologies, I'm sorry. But they had a very small facility that had a tarmac, several maintenance bays, aircraft hangars. And I didn't notice anything unusual. It looked actually rather antiquated. You know, it looked like something just around the Korean War era. Nothing to see there, absolutely not, except they had some of their hangar doors open. And one thing that I noticed was before the world was really aware of it, I saw my first version of a drone because they didn't really talk about, you know, automated UAPs is what they would call it back then, you know, believe it or not, when they were referring to a drone.
Mm-hmm.
And this is no reference to Tom Cruise because I've been beat up on this before. Way before Maverick and Top Gun, they had, I happened to look over and I saw an object that was probably 4 or 5 foot tall, and it was clipped onto some wings. But it looked very saucer shaped and it was dark black. And what would happen, it was basically a carrier, you know, the wings section, that when they would take off this object, once it was in flight, they would drop the wings off. That was just for initial lift, right? But the reference is they called it back then, they called it the Dark Star. And this is no reference to the SR-72 version that they used in the movie.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's part of the problem sometimes in the genre, making references that it's almost as if there's a built-in deniability on some things. You know, as soon as I mention Dark Star, people will laugh at me because they saw the,
Yeah.
you know, what came first, the condor or the egg, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, well, when I was on the facility, they drove us back to this hangar, and there was an engine removed from the airframe on a stand. Now, these were just rails on wheels on a trailer.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked over there, it was my engines, the one that I specialized in, and all they wanted me to do was to visually check the gauge on an oil tank. This doesn't make any sense. A complete waste of resources and time because remember, I still had an entire squadron that we had to get ready for war exercises that day. And the process is a very long checklist, you know, and it angered me a little bit, but made no sense. And then they took us out of there. You know, it was really a non-event. But I think it was something like 5 or 6 years later after that, I had already gone to Los Angeles inside the film industry, and I had seen a news broadcast out of Las Vegas, Nevada, and it was this fellow named George Knapp. And he was announcing to the world that he had recently met this fellow named Bob Lazar, who was also originally from my home state, oddly enough.
Mm-hmm.
And they were announcing the existence of a special facility that they referred to as the S4. I'm trying to think of what we called it. It was just a bombing range, and the significance of it is, you know, the S4, the term is just a grid. There's nothing
Mm-hmm.
fabulous about it. It's a location, like a GPS. And he said that there is a facility out there that they were testing and utilizing some very exotic, you know, technology, and they were intimating that some of it was alien, you know, extraterrestrial in origin. And I thought that was very interesting. I was looking at that. I'm like, no, that's that little dump that I went to that day. There's nothing out there, you know.
Mm.
Anyways, when I went to bed that night, I started a series of dreams that lasted for a long period of time repetitively. It was quite contrary to what I remembered originally happening. So while we're doing, my memory that came back later was that while we were out in Las Vegas, they were trying to imply that the airmen were becoming a bit unruly, going to the casinos and drinking too much, and they just wanted to get them all together and just put them in the barracks on base to make sure that they got enough rest, that they
Mm.
showed up to work on time, because it's a disciplinary action.
Oh.
So we would spend our day on the flight line, and then we'd get on a bus. And while we were there, we'd stop over at a little terminal in the back of McLaren, where the first thing I noticed is they had a lot of like 707s, but there was no tail numbers, which is completely illegal.
Yeah.
And I noticed there's a sign that said Janet, the
Hmm.
Janet terminal. And we'd pick some folks up that just got off a plane, and we'd go and literally, dump them off at their private residence anywhere, not assuming. So, anyways, as we go to work, we go back to these barracks out in the middle of the desert somewhere. Invariably, we come to that same gate. Speaking of, we'd be boarded by security police with AR-15s and check everybody's badges to make sure. And then we put on that base, and invariably you'd fall asleep. I mean, you had a long day. Everybody on there would just go to sleep, right? And I probably went on there 40, 50 times easily. But in my dream, I remembered somewhere along the way, within these trips just back and forth from work, that somewhere along the way, the bus would stop on the side of a dirt road, and we were boarded while everybody was asleep, but they didn't wake up. And then every
Oh.
time we did this, a couple people were taken off, and we'd wait for them, and then they were brought back. So when my turn came, my memory is walking out a bus in the middle of the desert, but all of a sudden the desert floor kind of had a ramp open up, and you walk down into it. And my memory was just being taken to give a very superficial ears, nose, and throat medical examination. And I had my memory was that my dream. It's hard to differentiate because that's the way that your mind compartmentalizes that, right? But there was an Asian doctor. I don't think he was military, wearing a white coat. Again, nothing significant, except it didn't really make a lot of sequential logical sense. But in the back of the room, there's a big window, almost like it was an observation, room. And I remember looking over there and seeing a lot of brass, men in full uniform with all the badges, and they're bored of medals, but also along with them. I know how crazy this sounds, because I thought I was having a dream. For
Hmm.
years, but
Maybe it
there's some
wasn't.
folks that there was some other people that were in the room, rather diminutive, and they appeared as if they were in costumes to go to some kind of party. I mean, I'm talking like somebody that looked like they had a turban and a cape, and like dressed up as like a stereotypical 1960s TV show genie.
Mm.
And some other guy had some weird headpiece on, and it's just one of those things. You take a second look, but okay, you go back, and then I was taken out of there and gone back and we finished our tour and went back to Eglin, Florida, off the coast, down the road from Pensacola,
Mm.
and boy, I just totally forgot it, and it did not make a lot of sense to me until it might have taken a decade analyzing and remembering till I came to a conclusion that maybe it wasn't just a dream.
Yeah.
Some of it possibly could have even been a screen memory. You know what I mean?
It
And
could
I
be a
think that was
good.
probably the beginning of my interest or my involvement in there. And was about the same time. Now, I did 4 years in the Air Force. I got out and I went back home to Michigan, and we were in recession. And I stayed with my parents for a few weeks, but they just weren't prepared mentally or financially to support, their son coming back home. So I got in my car and I just drove off to Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for a year and a half, I went and I lived with my brother, and we were in a little country band on Highway 90 outside of Beaumont, Crosby, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
I think they call it the High Chaparral. And I had quite a good time, but it wasn't
Yeah.
really, doing much.
Well, let me back up a little bit on
Yes.
that. I think when you were out in the desert, close to, in the proximity of Area 51, chances are that there was some mind programming going on. We know now from many testimonies that there are people that has implanted false memories,
Yeah.
as well as the stuff that you actually see is covered up so that it doesn't show up. So that might have been what happened to you.
Well, and years later, it's very odd what they can do to you, because they cover it up inside your brain, but it's like hypnosis. All right. There's certain things that can trigger it, and then it opens up and you remember.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not 100% effective. These things are still inside the human memory if you can extract them.
Yeah.
Another example that what we were talking about is I had a dream that I was riding my bike. I mean, at that time, I must have been 26, 27 years old. And I supposedly, had an accident. I don't remember it really happening, and the handlebars actually, wrapped around and put a scar on me. That was my memory. But the scar, which is still there to this day, happened just to be directly over a lymph node. And through that, and then you start putting two and two together. And I had odd little, something in your earlobe, or you'd find little things that weren't supposed, and they'd be there for years, and then they were just gone, right?
Yeah.
And
Could
long
be.
before anybody ever spoke about it, with my own physical eyes, I began to see at the time what I called elf moths, low frequency, light anomalies. I think they call them orbs now. I saw that with my own eyes years before anybody spoke about them.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this deck is starting to be stacked, right?
So what's happening from all of that? You may have been primed, and from some of the stuff that you experienced, they found another path for you where they were able to control what you were going to do by bringing you into the movies. Could that have been something?
Well, I think if they can, manipulate your memory, or they have the ability to broadcast thoughts and words into people's heads. Sometimes you might think it was your original idea, but maybe it wasn't. This is all speculation, but I'm trying to, formulate some kind of a theory of what was happening to me. Now, remember, when I got out of the service, I went back home to Michigan. There's nothing happened. I went to Texas, and then that fell apart, and I went to Vegas first, and in a long story, I got my car towed.
Huh?
Didn't have enough money to get it back. So the next thing you know, I'm on a bus going west, and I end up trying to figure out where I'm going to go, and I end up in Los Angeles. So to make a long story short, literally landing in front of the Grauman's Theater in Hollywood, just had a real cheap suitcase and a guitar in my hand. I mean, you couldn't be more, cliche, the homeless kid coming off trying to make it big in Hollywood, right? An overnight success, blowing up an overnight success after about 10, 12 years. It was a very hard go. And I spent several years of my life auditioning and being homeless and sleeping on friends' couches and taking every little odd job that I could. So there came a point. I'm trying to put it in sequential order correctly for you. All right. And I had been on Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman. I think that was my first big job. I was one of the townspeople and at her wedding. And at the time, I could sit on my hair. I was a musician, hippie, absolutely, right? Just because, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. When I was in the Air Force and that schedule, I had also got married, but it fell apart very poorly because she could not take, a new bride could not take the schedule of 3 weeks on, a week off, the war exercises. I'm trying to think.
Yeah.
They call it the mobility exercises. Within a month, she left me and went back home. She didn't realize what she was getting into, and that hurt me so bad that I felt like I was doing everything right and setting up my life and my investments correctly, but it all just came terribly crashing down on me. And I decided at that point I wasn't going to do what the world expected of me because it didn't work. I wasn't going to do everything by the book. I was going to now pursue what I felt I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And since my family, going way back again in Detroit, my grandparents were radio stars with the big band era. And this was live shows where they go from one hotel, do a soap commercial, and then switch over to the next hotel and they do a couple songs. And, Detroit during the 30s and the 40s was the land of the Purple Gang. I mean, I don't know if you know what that means, bootlegging. And the 70s kids have nothing on the 20s and the 30s kids. They partied and caroused as much as anybody, right? I mean, but this was in my blood, in my air. I was a performer and a musician and exposed to that since a very young age. So that was my natural draw, my natural progression. So jumping into the 90s, and I had just, done one little job after another, just scraping by. Several hundred people were given an audition because I'm 6'5". I was very strong. I was an entry-level stuntman. We trained constantly. I was gone into an audition with several hundred young men, and 5 of us were picked.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just this big armored bug-looking thing on a show called Space Above and Beyond, which I find ironic that I run into Walson later, and that's part of his moniker, right?
Yeah.
So my job was to be the machete-wielding monster, and I was always killing space marines in the year 2063. Very odd coincidence, right? Meanwhile, I think, well, we don't have enough time for all of this.
Yeah.
But somewhere around 1994, I was right on top of the Northridge earthquake in Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley, and a lot of activity started piling up. I was seeing a lot of things in the sky. I constantly look at the sky that just were not adding up. And I got to the point where I could contact one of my friends, take them out, and within a couple hours, they would see their first UFO.
Mm-hmm.
I would show it to them. I mean, so it happened so many times, I was trying to figure out a way to hasten that process. There has to be some way to not take 2 hours. If it's so regular, how could I do it in 10 minutes instead of 2 hours? Show people this, right? And I remember seeing contrails that had donuts on them. You know what I mean? It's like a string of pearls. And then the contrail, like the exhaust of a jet or something, right? The contrail would stop. You'd see a light orb ejected, and then suddenly it'd light up and there'd be a strip, just a ribbon of flame from horizon to horizon instantly.
Oh.
And I mean, I saw it over and over. Coming out of Vandenberg, this was the original testing in that area of the hypercraft. As folks don't realize this, they just recently announced the reality of the SR-72, which is, they showed pictures of it for years, but I mean, this stuff has been around for 30 or 40 years, and now they say, oh, look what we just made.
Yeah.
We're so far behind. Making a long story longer, right? But somewhere along the line, I realized that there was a lot of things hiding in the clear blue sky right above us. If you can imagine taking a silver ball, highly polished, reflective chrome, and put it in the sky, it will reflect everything around it. It could be right over you and you wouldn't see it. And that's even before they applied any type of visual stealth technology. In other words, you can't. It's intentionally, there are tricks of light.
Yeah.
So I had come across I met a fellow named Preston Dennett. I don't know if you know that name. And
Yeah,
he had
I know.
produced, Preston's a good guy. He had been publishing a lot of magazine articles. He had not yet gone to the level he is now. Very unassuming young man who is now one of the main faces in the UFO genre media, the TV. People that watch those shows will know this guy's face. Back then, he was Stephen Cannell, just a typist, a writer in a room filled with piles of books. And, you know, I thought he was very unlikely TV, personality for this. But I mean, now he's really blossomed. Anyways, he gave me a magazine, and inside it, the article was by William. I think he's the director of Arizona MUFON, William Hamilton III.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a story in there called Guy Dancer. And inside that article, he was talking about the sheriff in, I think it was Arizona, who they, on a daily basis, they'd see a UFO, but it seemed like as soon as they saw it, that he immediately took off and aligned itself in the vicinity of the sun. And now you can't see anything. You just, even a radar could not point at the sun and see something camouflage behind it. The radiation levels too high. And I thought to myself, what if this was not by accident? What if it was intentional? So I had to devise a way to look at the sun without looking at the sun. Now, if you consider, if you took a pair of Polaroid sunglasses, this bright yellow blinding sky all of a sudden turns very azure blue, and you can see a lot more. The reason being is the direct light coming right into your eyes or your camera lens is deflected. You're not getting the direct anymore. Now it's blocking it and you're seeing it from an angle. And there's a lot of information that can be gleaned from this. So I drew up an original diagram of how I would get underneath the overhang of a house somewhere in my apartment, and I would block out the surface of the sun that look right next to it. And then I had a friend of mine, I didn't own a camera. I had a friend of mine that lent me her camera. And you can imagine that conversation. Yeah. And I take your brand new video camera and point it at the sun, like, hell no, But I convinced her to do it. And the first time I ever tried it, I began to see regular geometry. And a lot of people want to say, you're just looking at dust and bugs. It's always, they're very good at making me look foolish, but it wasn't bugs and dust. Like I said, there was parallels and geometric squares and triangles coming down. And that was the beginning of the solar obliteration, technique method.
Yeah, and
insert there.
You got a video on YouTube talking about how you can use that solar obliteration to take these pictures. And I think, folks, this is what the technology behind doing that. So listen really close, because you can do this. It's simple.
And I want to reiterate that in the 90s, the public did not have easy, inexpensive access. There was no such thing as HD. We did not have high definition. We just had dial-up on internet. The internet had just come online. We did not have infrared technology. We did not have ultraviolet. They certainly did not have what they call the full spectrum. But that is the key to this. Number one, there's things that everybody could see if they had a simple IR scope.
Yeah.
I mean, it's there. You just don't see it because human, you know, visual range, the Hertzian wave, I think they call it, kind of puts it beyond our abilities of our biology. So we are able to overcome that. And I thought, I'm not going to try and sell this, but I felt like if I was the only person that knew this, I might be in a little danger. So I just dumped it ad nauseum in mass, and then I started getting a lot of responses of other people that said, "Hey, John, I was laughing at you, but I saw it." Okay, and then making a truncated version is the next thing you know, Paramount. I went to them with the story, and their producer said, "Okay, we'll bite." They brought a film crew out to my house for the television show called Sightings.
Yep.
It was
You know it.
originally on Fox, and then it was rolled over into the Sci-Fi Channel. When these fellas came out to my house, right in front of me, they were laughing at me. They thought I was hilarious, and they couldn't understand why their production company would waste the time with something so foolish. They were with me about an hour and a half. By the time they left, they were not laughing anymore. And that was, again, just the beginning of the intro. I spent the next several years on the circuit. I got to be friends with Whitley Strieber. He knows me very well. I've done his podcast.
Yeah.
I've spoke to him for 30 years. I got to know Art Bell, Robert O'Dean. Wonderful, wonderful man. I got to, I think the first time that I was mentioned in I wrote my own article that the late Timothy Green Beckley out of New Jersey, he was the first one that published me, and it went around the world.
Yeah.
Then the country of South Korea, their university system got a hold of this, and they made it a national deal. Meanwhile, the Americans don't hear about this stuff. Okay, but I had spent so much time just getting beat up, and people think that a lot of um, individuals are in this for attention or the money. You're just doing it for the money. I've been in this genre for like 40 years. I think I have netted like $300.
Yeah.
Not a real good financial plan. Apparently, not in it for the money. And then somewhere along the line, the late Jose S. Camilla, I don't know if you know that name, the Rods.
Hmm.
He had intimidated that I was basically trying to co-opt his information. There's no connection there. But the problem is, I had accidentally, I want to be more honest, intentionally, I figured out a way to get these things to come down to us. We figured out how to signal them, and if they were sentient at all, they would react. Well, boy, did they react.
Yeah.
I have a multiple videos where it wasn't zoom lens, it wasn't enlarged, but they filled up the entire screen with detail. But at some
Yeah.
point, I just walked away from it.
Yeah.
And during this, go ahead.
Talk a little bit about taking these pictures or movies or videos of it. Talk about the technicality that people can actually do in order to take those pictures, because we need a horde of people out there doing this to prove it to themselves and their friends, to expand the knowledge.
Well, there's definitely a great element of evolution in this process. My intention always was to get the information out there, make it available, and then people would return to me and start teaching me.
Mhm.
In the meanwhile, I mean, we're talking now 25 years since this started, right? And there's been other people, not even without knowledge of me, and I call it the 100 monkeys theory. If it became obvious to me and if I could see it, somebody out there sooner or later was going to come to the same conclusion.
Mhm.
The biggest, um, you know, the biggest affirmation that I received was one of the people that I had shown how to do this start returning their results, and it got really insane. They weren't really getting the same level of detail and results that I was, but I've been doing it longer than they had. Now, meanwhile, I had just done the Art Bell show. I had been published, and I get a phone call from an agent, and I was just a stunt man, an extra, if you will, that we want you to come down for this interview because presumably because of my physicality, my size, somebody had to be of certain stature to do this job. Okay.
Mm.
I went down there and this happened to be the Star Trek Gene Roddenberry's Paramount.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, while I'm blowing up and becoming very popular as this new guy on the block with UFOs, I got hired to be a space alien on Star Trek. Completely unrelated, I thought. And then one day, I come home from work working on Star Trek, and my girlfriend at the time, we're on the second floor in a really fancy place in the San Fernando Valley of California called Reseda. Yeah, that's where you want to go.
Yeah.
She said, John, I'm very concerned. There's a car sitting down there, and I feel like they're looking at me or us. I'm like, oh, come on, right? So you'd have to know the layout of the apartment that I had at the time, but it was the living room. In between was a kitchen area, and then the back room was an office and your bedroom. I had this little cubby with a short window and went in there and I looked down. Meanwhile, the Men in Black movie had just been released several weeks before this. Okay. And there is a black LTD sedan with two guys with suits and sunglasses in it. And when I looked out the window, they immediately looked at me and smiled.
Oh.
And I'm thinking, this is some of my buddies playing a joke on me, right? I'm like, I'll get them. I'm going to run downstairs, go out the front door, and I'm near an industrial park. There's only a couple ways in. You can't peel down a side road. You have to go down along. There's no way they can escape my visual, line of sight, right? I run out the front door, come around behind them, and the car is gone. And it was like 15 seconds. But I saw them, right? And I looked all directions. It was gone. And that gave me a chill, right? And I'm like, and
Yeah.
not long after that, I had a connection with JPL in Pasadena because I had forwarded my videos, and he said one of my guys says it's nonsense, another guy says you bullseyed, you hit something for real. And he said that listen, can I have somebody call you? Can I have your permission to somebody call you? And I'm not going to say who it is, but I said, well, sure, go ahead, because I'm feeling like I'm getting some progress here.
Mm-hmm.
And I forget, the man just identified himself as being with the NSA, and I know what that meant.
Yeah.
And then I got scared. I said, listen, I'm a patriot. I'm not subversive. I'm not playing anything. He said, we know that. And they said, really? And he said, what you think you are filming is what you're filming. I'm like, oh my God, thank you. Can you, give me some reference? Can you back me up or something? Oh, I'm sorry. We don't do that. You can't give me a letter or something I can prove that you all are on the same page with me. Well, that's not what we do. And I said, well, I'm not really anything more than a blue collar, film worker. Why do you contact me? And his response was, well, we have to get our information from somewhere. My mind
Oh,
blown.
oh yeah. But let me back up a little bit again. I want to hear about how to take those pictures. So do
Okay,
you
well, and
block out the sun, and where do you aim and stuff?
well, I wanted to show you, and I know that I sent you this book here,
Yeah.
Solar Obliteration. I mean, it took 20 years between when I first wrote it and when I finally got it published. All right. But the solar obliteration is an experiment. It's supposed to be a beginner's experiment on how you can prove this stuff for yourself. Because I got very tired of the warehouse mentality of the people that want to control the narrative. Even, God bless him, Art Bell is almost like all roads go through Rome. And you're depending on these people even now. The term public disclosure,
Yeah.
you know that one. I don't need personally public disclosure because I think disclosure means something different to each individual.
Yeah.
How you process it. And some people have more of a spiritual connection. Other people, you know, it's technical, and then others are just entertainment. So it's going to be a one-on-one basis. For me, the reality of UAP, UFOs, space aliens, all that was proven decades ago. I
Yeah.
don't care what they decide when, you know, it's okay to believe now. Let's try and be a little more, you know, independent thinking in this. It's just, well, it's just my stance. I'm not waiting
Yeah.
for them to give me permission to believe it.
And for
So
those
you asked
those
how it was done. If anybody was to Google solar obliteration, they will find diagrams, they will find years worth of videos, and from other people who took my advice. There's a lot of people that had done it and had neglected to mention where they got it from, and actually became known ufologists themselves. But it's an entry, it's an access pass, because once you allow yourself, your paradigm, to accept this, over time it'll expand. It'll expand.
yeah. Yeah.
So I was a starting point. I was a launching board. Okay.
Hmm.
Beyond that, this thing could be taken far beyond, and they would turn it in. There'd be a parallax effect. They could take what I have, combine it with theirs. Now we got a polymer. You know what I mean? One molecule plus another molecule makes a third. They would turn it into the next level.
Hmm. Let's
But
parlay this into the
yes,
next
yes.
section, but about the book Fast by John Walsh, and the pictures. Talk about the pictures in there that cannot be explained away. They are there in space looking down at us.
Well, somewhere around 2006, 2007, I had become aware of this fella in England that had figured out a way to take some really dramatic images. And, you know, with my background, I recognized it immediately as legitimate. A lot of people still won't, their mind filters it and they will not allow themselves to, so they have to find every reason why it's not. And I thought, well, that's game over. This guy's figured out how to film this stuff, and he zooms in on it. Anyways, the process that John Walson uses, he's an expert at building lenses and telescopes. And then somewhere along the line, he had just a simple, you know, Sony VHS camcorder. And I don't know how the guy figured it, but doggone it, he realized that he had to take the front lens off of the camera, and he manipulated the barrel, which is adjacent to, or part of, the what they call the CCD. I think it's a charged coupling device is the correct term. So without the lens in its way, he then took this camera, attached it to the back of a very powerful telescope, and now we have a direct focus of the camera on the mirror. Now, mind you, at the same time, even lenses have been really dramatically improved in technology since that time. And the trick is that he takes this powerful telescope, and then he takes the camera, focuses on the lens, and he has the added um, ability of the camera to zoom on the mirror. So now we go from hundreds to thousands times magnification. And I mean, that's the simple intro. This is just what he shared with me. And it's, you know, it takes some time and evolution. This guy, you know, it's not something you just jump into. It's a process to learn on the level that this guy has. So there'll be a bright star, and he focuses lens on it and gets this dramatic magnification. And all of a sudden, as he's drawing it in and closer, starts popping up such detail and such repetitive, you know, illustrations of what they're doing. that now we could start studying this ad nauseum. You can really go over it. And I think the first, he had been doing it for several years without telling anybody, but he had contacted a fellow, Gary Gilmore. I think he was with Cambridge University. I don't know if that's Massachusetts, who looked at it and he said, well, absolutely. You have taken the camera and the telescope and ran this to the absolute extremes of what they call refraction. And a good friend of mine, a fellow named Miles, I think is out of the UK, told me that refers to the the structure, the glass structure of a lens, and it's putting it to its maximum capacity. There are limits to how much a piece of glass and the atomic structure of it can, focus on, and they're always taking this technology up. But for at this time, he said, you just have what they call lucky imaging. Basically, you figured out something that only a few people in the world are even aware of. So he focuses in on these stars, and the next thing he's seeing something on the lines of an Ohio-class submarine in outer space. Now, folks don't know the background of this, but in the military, if you were to stand on the deck of an Ohio-class nuclear submarine, it would be about the distance of a football field or 1.5 football fields, 140, 150 yards. We're not talking feet, we're talking yards. This is massive. But they are up far enough that conventional telescopes and people can't really see it. And they're just a star. What's wrong? That's a planet. People so easily dismiss it. But he's overcome the objections of the technology. And then I want to say in April of last year, I get a request on Facebook from John Leonard Walson to friend request, right? And I thought I was being played with, because this guy, I have a pretty good level, but this guy is like up in the stratosphere. There's no reason he should contact me. I mean, he's like one of the Hollywood great stars versus, an entry level extra as far as our ability and what he is doing. Just so far, no pun intended, eclipsed mine. But as it turned out, it was really him. And I got to talk with him, and a lot of people don't know about this, but Mr. Walson, now it's classified and is unclassified, but he has spent most of his life in service of Her Majesty, officially and unofficially, as what the Americans would call a special ops agent. He's a highly trained investigator. I don't know if he appreciated me saying that. And as we're saying this, Mr. Walson is really being harassed, if not attacked, for what he had the gall to release to the public. I haven't been harassed yet. I'm just a journalist, and I'm on the other side of the pond. But through, his service, he went through some very rough deals, and there is a certain amount of PTSD.
Yeah.
And when he types, there's a little bit of shake. I'm also an educated, trained writer and published writer. He is not. My apologies. Sorry. So I said, hey, John, what would you think about if I wrote your book for you? Because he kept having to repeat his emails, sending out for decades. He's had to resend. I said, why don't we just, collate your collection? But his story is really kind of scary and dark. And what's happened to him because of this? I said, well, how about for the first edition? Maybe we omit that and let's make it family friendly. But in between, if you read between the lines, we're going to give you the information in it. Now, nowadays, a lot of people don't read anymore.
Yeah.
So keeping that in mind, my lady, she said, this guy has so many years worth of these photographs and these videos. Why don't you make it a picture book? So you can fast the book F.A.S.T, Far Above Space and Time.
There you go.
When you go through this, every single page has multiple photographs and diagrams. He doesn't hold anything back. He tells you the equipment he used. He told you the range, the specs, how he's doing it. Because I've had a lot of people, I've even had reviews on Amazon saying, well, what's the point? He doesn't tell you anything. Oh my God, Augie, ad nauseum, repetitively, that book is nothing but repeating how he's doing it and with what. And even more, to me, even more incredible about his story, what he's done, is the people that know of him and have personally had interaction. J.K. Rowling from the Harry Potter invited him out to her house to show her catalog and had communication with Queen Elizabeth II herself, vetting John Walson. The Queen vetted John Walson to J.K. Rowling and asked John if he could forward the catalog. Believe me, he was at the highest levels of just personal contacts and friends with King Charles, Queen Elizabeth. I mean, I could go on for hours to the point where people are like, come on, you're crazy. No, this is real, all right? And John Lear invites him out to his house in Vegas, and John Walson builds one of his telescope devices. I call it the Walson device. It's proprietary, but, you know, and the next thing you know, John Lear is filming these things over his mansion outside of Vegas.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a slam dunk checkmate.
I have looked at some of those pictures and they are incredible. It is almost like you have a close-up shot of a submarine that is modified a little bit. They got some additional things to it, but it's a submarine sitting in space. Look to maybe around 300 to 400 miles out, possibly in low orbit, some of them. But it's there.
Well,
you can see it.
Luckily, there was one frame that John had gotten maybe 10 years ago where the International Space Station was in the same frame as one of these objects. Now we can find a relativity. Now we can make comparison. Through like comparisons of the red shift, you know, if something is a little lower on the horizon in the sky, the angle of light that has to go through a lot more than if it's directly above at 12 o'clock high, right? So it has a tendency to redshift it. So you can even make the analysis of the color of one object to another and find relative. Anyways, they're moving back and forth. I want to go back to this thing you said about the submarine. We have a submarine, but then on the back of it is a tail section that's on a ratchet. And it has large aerialons. And it can move straight out or at any degrees. It's very manipulable, almost like the elbow to the wrist. In outer space, there is absolutely no reason for a flight surface. There's no reason for a flap. You know that, you're a pilot.
Yeah.
You don't have aerialons in space. And this tail section on this thing is so highly reinforced that it's built for very serious stress. And the only reason that I could see, and I'm speculating, is because it's not staying in space. It's in space, it comes down, and this is built for underwater as well. And if you needed a tail section underwater, that would mean that you're going really high speed.
Yeah.
I would say several times what a conventional high-speed nuclear submarine. So these USOs are also us. And they, you know, I also saw some things up there that looked like just a regular aircraft carrier in space. Why? What would that mean? Well, if you had anti-gravity technology and you landed this thing on the ocean and then just casually went into port, no one in the area would look at it and think twice. They could reload with cargo, go back out, and then take off again.
Yeah.
And ironically, I think a few years ago, there was a Marvel movie of the Avengers where they included aircraft carriers that could fly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think our technology is even beyond what they show in those movies that seems so fantastic.
Yeah, and I
Anyways,
want to say also that these pictures in that book, Fast, F-A-S-T, you can find it on Amazon. Go and put fast and far above space and time in there, and you can get those pictures are so unique. Nobody else has anything close up like that.
well, and I was saying that, you could buy this book and not even read it and spend a couple hours and you would understand the gist of the story if you were illiterate.
Mm.
And that was done on purposely. And it was also done that it wasn't scary. I didn't put in all the scary bits
Yeah,
because we wanted to think forward that maybe teenagers and stuff could look at it and not have nightmares. But I mean,
yeah,
at the same time, I have to imagine there's some out there that weren't exactly pleased that I had figured out some of the things that I had. They didn't
yeah.
count on my technical background. I wanted to get back to that point where I
Yeah,
said we saw,
I
sorry,
see now that we have 5 minutes left of the show, so let's economize the
oh
time.
my God, oh, yeah. I apologize, but we had seen a frame of the space station and one of these objects in the same frame. We can make comparison. And if you knew the technology of the telescope, I approximate that these things are about 100, 150 miles beyond the space station altitude. Now they go back and forth. So
Yeah.
you could see them at 50 miles. You could see them, I think, between 400 and 450 is an average because it stays out of, and they're also, they're also stealth. They're also jammed. So radar and things like that are not going to pick them up easily. They can line up with known stars and you're going to have a problem seeing it. As
Yeah.
people want more information, if they went to Amazon Books, John F. Wilkie will pull up the F.A.S.T. It'll pull up solar obliteration and some other things. If they did a Google search on John L. Walson, there is decades, hundreds and hundreds of hours of his materials that you can go back to not even 2010. And I mean, it'll just throttle you. It'll just blow your mind. And we haven't
Yeah.
even gotten to the point where we talk about the EBE, factor. He didn't
Mm-hmm.
just film. He didn't just film UFOs, and it doesn't matter if he uses his telescope. It doesn't matter if he uses a night vision goggle or a conventional camera. This guy gets the most unbelievable collection that I think exists. But he shows it to you. He shares it with you, for you can prove this for yourself. To me, it's absolute proof of the reality of the secret space program, maybe even proof of alien life.
Yeah.
If
I
you
think
decide to dive into it far enough, you have to put in a little bit of time and work to answer the question for yourself. You know what I'm saying?
I saw
It's still,
one of the pictures of these objects in space. It looked to me like there was actually close enough to see an alien head looking out a window.
I think, like a crane. They
Yeah.
have large cable. I think that's us. I don't think that's aliens. We found a lot of very exotic
Okay.
craft doing very mundane things. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of construction equipment up there. I found refueling facilities. I found
Hmm.
hydrazine towers. I mean,
Yeah.
aliens from another dimension don't need all that. That's human beings.
Yeah.
90% of what people are saying is us, in my opinion.
Yeah. They don't need a gas station in space. But I got
Well, they are,
one last question for you. Going back to your time on Star Trek, do you think that they had an extraterrestrial advisor on some of those Star Trek movies?
I don't know if it's conscious. It might be, but I think can certainly, without your knowledge, inspire you. if you get my drift.
Yeah.
If we really peeled back that onion, we're going to do about 5 or 6 shows, Augie.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the fact that you would be aware of us. And my last parting comment, I am really think it's very necessary for the United States audience to be aware of John Bernard Walson. It will change your life, and it is censored and it is blocked, a lot of times on the internet. But if you know how to get in there, and we're making this information available. I know a lot of people think I'm trying to sell a book, but I'm trying to make people aware of the concept and the premise of what this man is doing, because it's a game breaker. I mean, and if you have IR and UV scope technology, you will find things that you never expected. And like I said, if we could have about 3 or 4 more hours, we could really dig. I just scratched the surface with you, sir, but I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful that you would have me on.
Yeah, this was good. And especially the last part of it right here is when you got into the meat of what's going on in space, as well as what we can see using that camera that he developed. And without that modification to the camera, I don't think you can see
You wouldn't see it. And there's not a few, there is hundreds. Our planet is completely, there's a net around us. And I don't believe it's to be investigating or watching bad actors in, other countries. The only reason I could see to have that kind of umbrella is to protect from what's the outside, not below. That's just my opinion. I think somebody has gotten involved with not only alien races, but some real bad versions of them. And there is Mr. Miles, I think they're in it up to their necks. And the only chance that we have is to arm ourselves with knowledge. And we don't need consensus. It's something an individual can do for themselves.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are down to the end here. So I thank you very much, John Bro. Will.
Well,
gosh,
if people go to Facebook, if people go to Facebook and just ask for John Bro, it's a nickname, Wilkie, they'll be able to find my Facebook my Facebook page, and I certainly will speak or communicate forward information to anyone who is legitimately interested.
Yeah, that sounds
and
wonderful.
Please do Google John Bernard Walson. If you have the interest, it will change your life.
Yeah, that's where you get to go to Amazon, and because we have told you
all over the internet. There's decades worth of work. I'm surprised the whole world doesn't know this man's name. I'm trying to change that through the help of people like yourself, Mr. Augie. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, well, thank you for being with us, and for all of you out there watching, until next time, be good to each
Live
other.
long and prosper.
There you go.
You have a good day, sir. Thank you again.